Hello there and welcome back to the studio. This time we're continuing with a deep dive on how I arranged, produced, and mixed Forging On. This second part will be about the remaining instruments, the brass, the strings, the guitars, and the immense vocal package. Before we begin, I would like to say thank you for watching, listening, and interacting with my videos. If you want to support me directly and get some cool rewards in return, consider becoming a patron. As a patron, you get access to MP3 downloads before everyone else, instrumentals, special Discord access, and more. Now, let's get on with the video. This orchestral folder has two parts, brass and strings. Let's start chronologically and look at the brass first. Actually, I'm not sure brass is the right word. Maybe horns would be a better fit. The alpenhorn was the first instrument I picked for this song. Such a tremendous instrument. This instrument comes from the East-West Fantasy Orchestra library. From the same library, I have also used the low brass patch, which I think is like tubas and trombones maybe. Then in the chorus, I'm also adding a contrabassoon, playing virtually the same bass line, and together they form a sound that is so powerful and complex. Doesn't that just sound like dwarven mountain halls to you? I love it. Problems do arise, however, when you have such a solid, powerful, and complex sound with a lot of low end. And then you add 100 layers of vocals, ranging from sub-bass to falsetto, and then you add an actual bass, or several percussion layers, and a drum kit. How are you going to make all that fit? I didn't want to cut out the brass completely because I think they have such an iconic and fitting sound for the song. Instead, I used a bit of automation in this frequency plugin. Once the chorus hits, band 1 of this EQ is activated, pushing the low end down, leaving room for bass and voices.
Rock to even flow.
So here in the outro, I'm turning the band off to let it reclaim that place. Now that I see the automation lanes, I'm not sure why I didn't push up this volume lane a little bit for the outro. Let's play with it in real time and fix it. Yeah, that's better. Moving on to the strings. I had the pleasure of having some live strings tracked for this song. They were tracked through a Royer stereo microphone with a Neve 1073 preamp in You Banished Privateer's rehearsal room. There's a main melody and then a dub playing one octave below. Let's listen to this with and without processing. Add the Hardanger Fiddles VST, the Stradivari solo violin, and 2 hurdy-gurdies, and we have ourselves a string section. When I mix classical instruments, I tend to be very light with the processing, but since this is pretty much the main hook melody, and it needs to cut through a busy mix, they are quite pushed. For the main melody, there's a bit of light compression to even it out, and then soothe to take out some harshness. I'm using the S1 imager to place it a little bit to the left, while I'm using a similar move on the octave dub, but placing that one slightly to the right. Then I have an Omega N saturator to pretty much distort it and give it some edge. Bit of EQ push, 1K and upwards, and a limiter. I'm using a similar setup for the octave dub, but different stereo placement like I mentioned, and the EQ is different, where I try to bring out more of the fundamentals in this harmony. They are both routed through this violin group, where I'm running them in parallel through an AR1 for additional compression, distortion, and top lift. Then another soothe instance, because this processing has a tendency of bringing out quite a bit of harshness. Definitely needed. Then, to top it off, lots and lots of reverb. I'm using several different effect sends to create a complex space. I'm using a combination of delays on the violin channel, and then a plate, a hall, and 2 mono slap delays for the group channel. These mono slap delays are panned hard right and left, just to get a little tickle in the eardrum and create additional width. I was quite conservative when panning these, so this will compensate for that. Let's take a moment to listen to the hurdy-gurdy, because it's just a fun instrument. It's kind of trashy sounding. I mean, it's not a beautiful sounding instrument, but it has so much character, and it really gives off this folky vibe. Finally, there's a few flavor elements in the first verse here. The action strings playing staccato harmonies, and the tremolo strings just create this tension. It's quite low in the mix, but it adds to the build-up to the first chorus. Let's move on to the guitars. First, Dist 1 is a 6-string guitar, with the left one being Easy Mix Devin Townsend crunch tone, my go-to for rhythm guitars. The right one has another tone to achieve more width, but I've still tried to match them in perceived loudness. They each have soothe on them to filter out the harshness, because these guitars are also quite pushed in the upper mid-range. Lots of little nasty resonances in there. The group channel has an Omega N preamp for a bit of extra saturation, and then a frequency instance with one active band set to mid-side. The sides are untouched, and the mid is set to trigger off of the lead vocal, lowering the mid-range of these guitars quite a bit when the vocal is active to create more space in the frequency spectrum for it. The dist 2 guitars are played with another guitar, a 7-string. The sound is much less pushed in the higher frequencies, but they have a bump at 5K. The tone is pretty broken because I've pushed the amp simulator into saturation with decapitators and this Omega 458A plugin. The idea wasn't to make this tone sound great on its own, but to add a bit of body and grit to Distortion 1, which is the main electric guitar. Next, Dist 3 guitars are quite subtle in the mix. They're to bring a bit more drive, rhythm, and extend the tone with more overtones. I've EQ'd them to bump a little bit in the 2 to 3K range, which is usually where the vocal intelligibility is, and thus these guitars never play with the vocals. Then the guitar lead is honestly somewhat of a remnant of a much older version of this song, when I felt that I needed to dub the VST string melody. There's not a lot of work done here, but I left it in because I felt that it added some thickness to the melody in the last chorus. Finally, Martin Floberg's magnificent solo. A bit of compression, a phaser to create some additional interest, especially for those long notes, and a little bit of EQ push. Lots of different effect sends too. As you can see, the two primary rhythm guitars have some volume automation made to make them sit right in the mix at any given point. Then all the guitars are routed through another group where 3 stages of additional saturation have been done, with the AR1 in parallel, which also compresses, another decapitator in parallel, and then a black box HG2 with a little bit of saturation and a tiny bit of widening, just 7%. Now, at last, the vocals. Let's go through the lead vocals first, and I will say that this isn't one of those super advanced vocals with lots of automation and shit. It's rock, and it's quite straightforward.
The earth itself drawing from its core, the master in his solitude, liquid mountain pours. Smoke is rising from the north, so tell the tales of yore. Skill beyond of mortals, furnace burning evermore.
It's also noteworthy that the lead is pretty much only leading in the verses, and in the chorus it blends with the rest of the vocals, and I didn't want it to take too much space in the mix during those parts. Now, the lead C is the main vocal line. The signal chain goes as follows: a Lindell de-esser, followed by frequency with some corrective EQ and a little bit of mid-range boost. Then RVox for the first stage of compression, and then the virtual mix rack where most of the compression is being done. Inside here, additional de-essing, mic modeling, since I'm using the ML1 modeling microphone, and then 3 stages of compression. The first stage, the FG401, is set to fast attack, fast release with a threshold set to catch just the transients and even out the signal. Then the 1176 Blue Stripe clone, which hits the vocal with around 5 to 10 dB of gain reduction. Quite slow attack, fast release. Then the third stage of compression is this LA2A clone, opto-compressor style. Another 3 to 7 dBs of compression during the loudest peaks. These 4 compressors pin the vocal quite hard, placing it up front and making sure to catch any rogue transients while lifting the quieter parts.
Hidden in the earth itself, drawing from its core, the master in his solitude, liquid mountain pours. Smoke is rising from the north, so tell the tales of yore. Skill beyond of mortals, furnace burning evermore.
Then a Lindell TE100 EQ to boost just 2 dBs of 3.2K and a 10K shelf lift. Then we have another compressor, the Cubase Vintage compressor, not doing that much, just around 3 dBs of gain reduction at the loudest peaks. Cubase EQ, lowering additional 200 Hz, and a wide bell boost at around 2K. As you might have noticed, I'm kind of a big fan of doing these little moves here and there on several EQs and compressors instead of slamming one instance really hard. The result is often more transparent, even though you may achieve the same amount of gain reduction on a compressor. There's always a risk of redundancy, but I try to move forward and maybe add another compressor or EQ instead of going back and tweaking what I've already done, although I will do that if necessary. The same can be said about the de-essing. Even though I track through a de-esser, I'm using 2 plug-in de-essers, but I'm still automating the pre-gain of this track to reduce sibilance. Perhaps one day I'll record the perfect vocal that don't need all this, but I just find that when I'm working with all this, is that when you compress really hard and when you boost the top a lot, you will get a lot of unpleasant transients and sibilance, and automating the pre-gain and de-essing mitigates a lot of these problems. On that note, and the last effect in the signal chain, is in the lead vocal group bus, where I have one instance of Soothe, which is further smoothing out any harshness in the 3 to 9K area. Let's take a look at the sense of this channel. Just like I did with the violins, these mono slap delay effects create a subtle width to this single vocal.
Below the frozen peaks, hidden in the snow, can you hear the breathing of the bellows down below? Clanks of steel echoing from tremors long ago. Smoke and fire spewing over skies with blazing glow.
Then there's this octave dub send. Let me bring up this effect channel, actually. First, there's a little altar boy that pitches the vocal down an entire octave. Then a decapitator to make it more solid, and an R bass to boost the sub. I created this effect send for basses in the choir, but added just a little bit of it to the lead vocal to make it more thick and deep.
Breathing of the bellows down below, clanks of steel echoing from tremors long ago, smoke and fire spewing over skies with blazing glow, forge of mythic weaponry, monuments of woe.
There's also a dub of the lead vocal, very subtle in the mix. It adds a bit of extra grit, but doesn't attract any attention. In the second verse, after the first chorus, I recorded these octave dubs to further increase the thickness of the lead vocal. I believe I heard Joe Carell say that mixing is a game of inches, and I find this to be especially true for vocals. Aside from this, not a lot of automation with the lead vocal. The main thing would be the volume automation for the entire lead vocal group, where I'm raising and lowering the volume fader appropriately depending on the arrangement. Usually you want the lead vocal to always take place front and center, but I didn't like that very much for the choruses, and I thought it took too much attention away from the big choirs. Speaking of which, I think it's time to get on to the backing vocals. Let me just say that managing this in a comprehensible way was no simple feat. Just let me play the last double chorus with the choirs while I expand the folder structure. And we'll hum strong hammers from the song. Legends belong under mountains forging on. And we'll hum strong. From channel 119, which is the group channel where all the backing vocals go through, to 218, which is the last of the vocal stems. This wasn't recorded live with a big choir, but it's a collection of my recordings with different harmonies and a few friends and fans who wanted to contribute. Apart from the lowest bass, which I will talk about in a minute, I didn't send any instructions, but simply sent an early draft with some of my backing vocals. I think it sounded something like this. So during a couple of weeks, I received lots and lots of recordings, and each time I got a new set of takes. I made a new folder and a new group with that person's name on it. The only problem was that most people sent me a selection of different harmonies, some deep, some high, and setting the levels for the voices and making the entire choir balanced was becoming a nightmare. So eventually I restructured the choir like this, with basses, baritones, tenors, falsettos separated. This is closer to how you do it when arranging a live choir, with the exception that there are many variations inside of each category, since I never told people which harmony lines to sing. Let's listen to each section individually. My own backing vocals were exempt from this categorization because I also use these for harmonies during the verses, and also I'm very familiar with my voice and how it fits in the mix.
From the furnace melting rock to even flow, and we'll hum strong hammers from the song. Legends belong.
You probably noticed the audible ducking on sibilants and consonants. That's the automated pre-gain here in the group channel, where I make sure these don't grab any attention. It sounds a bit weird when soloed, but it's not noticeable and it makes sense in the context of the mix. Moving on to the basses. This was the trickiest to nail because, first, not anyone can hit these notes. Under mountains forging on. And secondly, without a solid bass as a foundation, the choirs would lack all that power and authority. So I had to manually pitch these. Since a pitchy bass throws off the entire mix, and these notes weren't easy to hit. At the lowest point, that's a B0. I couldn't hit that in my wildest dreams. I also brought out one take in particular to be the main sub-bass with heavy compression and send to the altar boy sub-effect.
And Wilhelm strong, hammer strong the song, under mountain forging on.
Oof. Oh, baby. Moving on to the baritones. It's a pretty wild gathering of voices, but with a pretty deep foundation.
And Wilhelm strong, hammer strum the song, legends belong.
Next up is the tenors. Here as well, several harmonies, but overall higher in tonality. Finally, some falsettos. So angelic. And all the voices again.
Under mountains forging on, and Wilhelm strong, hammer strum the song, legends belong, under mountains forging on.
I really love how it came out, and I'm so grateful to all the people who took the time to help me with this. I could have dubbed and dubbed these vocals into infinity without achieving this massive sound, because there's just no substitute for a variety of different voices. And hell, even the fact that all these were recorded in different locations with different microphones add to this immense mass of sound coming at you. And that's how I arranged, produced, and mixed Forging On. In the best of worlds, you learn something. Or maybe you feel more confused than ever. Either way, please leave a comment on what you appreciated or what I could improve. We're all here to learn and improve. Thank you so much for watching. I'll be back with more music soon. Bye!